Hey everybody, and welcome to another video in our beginner series for Blender. In this video, we're going to show you a few more tools to improve your ability to manipulate models. After this video, you'll be able to scale your models and the distance between selected vertices, as well as add new geometry and vertices, and of course delete them too. This will be most of the tools that we'll need to start creating interesting models, which will allow you to go off and start modeling simple objects on your own. Don't get too ambitious starting off, otherwise you might feel a bit overwhelmed and get turned off by it. I know. I used to spend days on models only to realize I messed up so badly it was unrecoverable, but sometimes that's just part of the learning process. Let's continue learning about modeling in Blender. The next tool I'm going to introduce you to is the Scale tool. You can scale the entire model, but most of the time we'll be scaling vertices within that model in edit mode. Let's take a look at that now. We're going to start off with our default cube again. In object mode, hover your mouse over to the 3D view and press the S key. Now move your mouse around and you'll see your model scale up and down. Left click to set the new scale for your model. Normally you don't actually want to do this. This affects the scale value of our model. If the scale is not 1, you might find some interesting results, strange results, and other errors that happen. To see what your model's scale factor is, press the N key while hovering your mouse over the 3D view. This will pop up the properties panel in your 3D view. Make sure you're scrolled all the way to the top. This shows the properties of the currently selected object, whether that's a model or a vertex or multiples of them. At the top we have the X, Y, and Z location. Click and hold your mouse over the top of these values and click and drag back and forth. You'll see the model move in that direction. Like I mentioned in the previous video, holding the Shift key you can change these values with much more fine-tuning. These fields are another way to change those values with a bit more precision. If you're doing architectural models, or you know the exact dimensions of the model you're making, you can use these fields to input the values exactly. Below the X, Y, and Z location fields, we have rotation. This works the same as the R key, and you can constrain it to the X, Y, and Z axis by adjusting each one of these fields. Again, if you know the exact angle, you can type it in here. But Blender lets you do that with shortcut keys. And since shortcut keys are the best way to navigate Blender, let me show you that now. Make sure your model is selected. Press the R key to begin rotating your model. Press the X key to constrain the rotation to the X axis, and press the 4 and then the 5 key, as in 45, to rotate the model 45 degrees. If you want to rotate the model in the opposite direction, press the minus key before or after the number. In other words, if you want to rotate negative 45 degrees, press the minus button and then typing in 45 for the angle you want to rotate. And if you're wondering, yes, you can rotate your objects in quaternions as well. Select click to place your model. Finally, below the rotation fields, we have scale. This is what we wanted to adjust. Usually you want these fields to be 1. If you want to make your object bigger, you do that in edit mode. I'll show that to you in a second. So let's reset those to 1 now. You'll see this changes our model back to the cube. That's okay. A best practice is to move your model in object mode and scale and rotate and other transformations in edit mode. This retains the local geometry of the object as you would expect it. Let me show you the preferred way of scaling your object now. But first I'm going to set the rotation back to 0. Okay, hit the Tab key to go to edit mode. Select the top vertices and press the S key and move your mouse. You'll see that they all scale toward and away from each other. You can get some interesting effects by tapering the shape of our cube. Play around with it a little bit. Select different vertices and see how they scale. Now that you've played around for a bit, let me explain. They scale to their median point. In other words, if you select two vertices, their median point is a point equidistant between them. In other words, the exact middle of the two vertices. If you have 3 vertices, it gets a little bit more complicated, but the median point is the weighted value between these points. To better illustrate this, select 3 vertices. If you have the manipulator tool selected, it'll be shown where the median point is. Another way to see this is the scale tool itself. Press S to scale them. You see where that dotted line goes into our geometry? That's the median point. It's important to know where your vertices are scaling to. Let's hide the manipulator tool for a second. Press the button on the bottom that looks like an axis. This will hide the manipulator tool. I usually keep this off anyway since it just gets in the way. Keyboard shortcuts are faster anyway. Now bring your mouse up to the 3D view, Hold down Shift and press S. This will bring up our snap menu. Select the cursor to selected option to put that crosshair looking thing on our vertice's median point. Hopefully you saw that move. This thing is called the 3D cursor. It's an extremely powerful and helpful tool that we'll get into a little bit more here, but a lot more in later videos. For now, go down to the menu at the bottom of the 3D view, the one that looks like two white circles, and select 3D cursor from that menu. This is the pivot point menu, and in the case of scaling, it controls how things are scaled to and from. This works with rotation too, and you can imagine how that works since it has to do with pivoting. Try it out and play with it a little bit. With the 3D cursor option selected, scale your vertices using the S key again. You'll notice nothing has changed. Now, if you choose to select with your left mouse button, you're going to click the right mouse button somewhere next to your cube. I'm going to hit escape first to cancel this, and I'm going to put my 3D cursor right about here, so I'm going to right click. I'm going to rotate our view a little bit, middle mouse button select and move. Now with your mouse cursor a little bit away from that 3D cursor, hit the S key. Notice that when you move your mouse toward the 3D cursor, the vertices move toward that point. That's scaling toward the 3D cursor. Why is that useful? Scaling toward an object gives you great control about how you shape your model. You can place that 3D cursor anywhere in your scene and use it to manipulate vertices. I use the 3D cursor all the time. Let's spice things up a little bit and add another cube to our scene. Let's cancel the scale first by hitting escape. First, go into object mode by pressing tab. Now, one way you might want to do this is by hitting copy and then pasting this cube, but we're going to do it a slightly different way. With the original cube selected, hold Shift and then press D to duplicate. Move your mouse. You'll notice that the new cube sticks to your mouse. In other words, using Shift D not only copies and pastes the cube, but it also enables the move operation, just like if you pressed the G key right after that. This is what we call a macro, a set of operations linked together. This is the preferred method of duplicating objects and vertices, so we'll use Shift D from now on. If you don't want to move the object after duplicating it for some reason, hit the escape key or select click without moving your mouse to place the model right where it is, just like you would with the G shortcut. So I'm going to hit the escape key now. Alright, so we're really throwing a lot of things at you now, but you may be wondering, is all modeling done with cubes? Well, they tend to be my favorite. They're far from the only geometry allowed in Blender. Here's another use of the 3D cursor. Wherever it is, new objects will be added at its location. Press and hold the Shift key and press A. This will bring up the Add menu. I know, another keyboard shortcut. If you're not friends with your keyboard, 3D modeling might not be for you. If you really want to learn Blender properly, keyboard shortcuts are a must. If you forget a keyboard shortcut, each view, say the 3D view, has a bunch of menus attached to them. Scan through these for different actions you can take, and they'll list their shortcut for each menu item. Some share the same keyboard shortcut. In those cases, that usually means that shortcuts bring up a menu with those items in it. In this case, an add menu appeared with multiple objects in there. With our add menu open, hover your mouse over the mesh option and then select UV sphere. This adds a faceted sphere where the 3D cursor is. But wait, what the heck is a mesh, you may be wondering, and why are all those shapes under that menu? A mesh is the object that describes our geometry. In other words, it's the model's geometric data. From now on, I'll be calling these models meshes, since that's the proper term. With our new sphere added, tab into edit mode and you'll see the sphere is made up of many vertices. If you look up near the top of Blender, you'll see that it says verts, 482 of 482. That means that you have selected in the current mesh 482 vertices out of 482 vertices total. You also see edges and faces. An edge is simply a line between two vertices. A face is made up of at least 3 vertices that make up the plane between those vertices. These are called tris or triangles. A 4-vertex face is called a quad, and they are preferred. Any more than that we call n-gons, or the variable n to denote n vertices, and gon, which is short for polygon. After that we have objects, lamps, and we have memory usage in the name of our mesh, in this case, sphere. In the properties panel, hit the N key if it's not open, and scroll down until you see item. Change sphere to something else. The name changes in the top and on the right in the outliner. Pause the video and take a moment to explore the other settings in that panel. Hit the N key to make it disappear. Okay, hopefully you had a little time to explore the properties menu. Now let's turn our attention back to the sphere. You may not want it there, or maybe you want to get rid of some of the vertices. Let's show you how to mess up our sphere by deleting some stuff. Select a single vertex and press the X key. Our delete menu is displayed. Go up to the vertices option and click. You'll see that the point you selected and surrounding gray faces that surround our vertex disappear. There's now a gaping hole in our sphere. You may be wondering why the X key and not the delete key. The delete key also works, not the backspace key, but the delete key. While modeling, you usually have your left hand on the keyboard and your right hand on the mouse, so a majority of the most often used shortcut keys are on the left-hand side of the keyboard. Tab out of edit mode and into object mode. With your sphere selected, hit the X key again. A menu will pop up to confirm our delete. Click the delete option with your mouse and our sphere is gone. Okay, now we're getting places. As an exercise to try on your own, let's try modeling a basic low poly forest or low polygon count forest. Alright, we actually have two cubes here, as you can see with the G key. I'm moving this here. I'm going to hit the X key to delete that extra one. Select this one, hit the G key, make sure there's nothing behind it, hit the escape key, and that'll return it to where it was. Now with our cube, go into edit mode. Select the top vertices by holding down the shift key and selecting them. Hit the G key, constrain it to the Z axis, and move it up. Zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to keep moving that up. Okay, I'm going to select all the vertices. And instead of scaling them, because if I scaled them right now, they would scale all toward the 3D cursor. I'm going to hit escape to undo that. I'm going to go back to our pivot menu and select medium point. Now when I scale this, it kind of scales into its own medium point. Going to escape, and now I want to make this skinnier, but I want to keep the height. And so in order to do that, I want to scale by the x-axis. I also want to scale along the y-axis. To do both, we hit the Shift-Z key. And what that tells Blender is we want to scale along both the x and the y-axis, but not the z-axis. So you can think of that as not the z-axis. So Shift-Z scales it along every other axis except for the z-axis. So I'm going to make this skinny like a tree trunk. Now I'm going to hit the 1 key to put it in front view, and I'm going to hit the 5 key to change from perspective to orthographic. Now you can see that this is a little off, and so instead of trying to fix these points, I'm just going to actually go into object mode, hit the X key, delete it, and add a new fresh cube to work from. So Shift A, Mesh, go down to Cube, and it added it where the 3D cursor is. Now what we can do to move it back to the origin is hit Shift S, cursor to center. That'll place it back on our origin, X, Y, and Z all equal 0. And then with our cube selected, hit Shift S again, and instead of cursor to center, we say selection to cursor, and that moves it back to the center. Okay, now if I go into front view, you can see that's our cube. I'm going to go into edit mode. Select the top vertices, so I'm going to have to hit the A key to deselect everything and select the vertices. Now G and Z, we'll move that up along the Z axis. A to select all the vertices. And now let's try this again. So scale, Shift Z to constrain it to the X, Y, and Z axis. We're going to scale this to make it skinnier. Okay, that looks good. Now another little trick that we'll do is we'll select these top vertices again, holding down Shift. Hit that Shift S keyboard shortcut again, and now do cursor to selected, and that'll put our cursor right in that median point between all those vertices. Zoom out a little bit. Shift A to add, and because we're in edit mode, we get a limited list of what we can add here. We can only add other meshes, and so in my case I want a UV sphere, and I'm going to scale that up by hitting S and scaling that up. And that's looking pretty good. I think that's a little bit big for our tree. So let's select everything by hitting A twice, scale, and that looks good there. Let's go into front view by hitting 1 on the numpad, and then moving everything down, Z, G, Z. I'm going to put that right on the plane there. Now if you want, let's say you want to get a little bit more precise, you can select it there. Now go unselect everything, select these vertices here, and instead of trying to line that up by eye, maybe we can zoom in a little bit here, hit the 1 key. And now instead of trying to line this up by eye, what you can do is open that properties panel up again by hitting the N key, scrolling up to the top, and selecting for the Z coordinate 0. And that places it right on that Z plane. Now if we zoom out here, it's looking maybe a little silly, but let's tab into object mode. And now to create a forest, we're just going to hit Shift D, and this is going to move it. But if you remember, if we move it in this way, it moves with the plane of what we're looking at right now. So if I move it down, it'll actually move it through into negative Z space. I want to move it along the Y and along the X axis, but not the Z. So again, not Z, we can think of that as we're in the move operation here, Shift Z. Now it's always going to be at the bottom of that Z plane, and so I'm going to put one here. I'm going to Shift D to duplicate it again, constrain that to the Z plane, so everywhere but Z, and put that there. And a little trick you can do is you can Shift select multiple objects, hit Shift D again, and that'll duplicate those three, and Shift Z to constrain it along the Z plane. And we can even rotate these, but I want to constrain that to the Z axis and make that kind of a pivot here, and maybe do that, move it again, constraining it on the Z. Select this one, G, Shift Z, and there you go. If you want to move it along other planes, this works the same with Shift Y to only move in the X and the Z axis, or Shift X to move it only in the Y and the Z axis. Alright, so now that we made a few trees, press the number 0 on your number pad to look through your camera. And that doesn't quite look right, so let's select a few of these trees and make them a little bit smaller. Now we want to do that in edit mode, not in object mode, so hit tab to tab into edit mode. Select everything by hitting A until everything's selected. Now scale those down. But if you look at it at another angle, it actually went up into the air, and we don't want to do that. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go back into object mode because we actually want to set the 3D cursor right where this origin is, and that's what that dot here represents, is the origin, which is at 0 on our Z axis, and place it there. And with our tree selected, Shift S, cursor to active. Cursor to active will place the cursor on the active object's origin point. Again, that origin point is that little dot on our object. And because all these objects are the same, the origin point is always at the bottom here. So this is really convenient for us. And now if you remember, if we go back into edit mode, we can scale toward our 3D cursor. And now when we scale toward that object, it stays right on the Z plane. So let's go back into our camera view and see what this looks like. Move this around, constrain it to the Z plane. That looks good there. Edit. For this one, we got to put the 3D cursor back. So object, edit mode to scale and transform. Scale that down a little bit. I don't want to have to keep placing the 3D cursor for each one of these. I'm going to delete all these by selecting all of them, holding down Shift, hit the X button, and hit delete. Now what I can do is duplicate these. Shift D to duplicate, constrain that on the Z, maybe move it, rotate it along the Z. And see, because I have the 3D cursor as my pivot point, when I rotate it along the Z, it's going to rotate around that 3D cursor. That's okay for right now. I'm just going to move these around until they look good. Put some in the back here. A, and A again to select everything. And as you can see, our camera is also selected along with our light. We don't want that, so let's hold down Shift and click our light until that's deselected, and then our camera. Okay, so now we just have our objects. That looks pretty good. I'm going to move this just slightly to be a little bit more in frame, and there we go. And now I have something to render. Let's go up to change our Blender render to Cycles render and hit the F12 key to get a preview of our forest. Okay, looking a little interesting, very, very gray. So let's take a look at how we can change that. Hit Escape to return back to our 3D view. And I'm going to place our 3D cursor back onto the grid. So hit Shift S, cursor to center, and that moves it back to our 0, 0, 0 origin. Now we want to add a plane because there's really nothing under our trees. So hit Shift A, add a plane, and then in edit mode, by hitting tab, scale that up. Now it's already constrained on the Z axis, so let's just scale that up, and there you go. So we can see a little bit here, so let's go into object mode, and we can move it. And again, constraining that to the Z plane by hitting Shift Z and moving that back until it takes care of all of our view there. Right about there, it looks good. Let's take a look at what this looks like now. Okay, so here's our low poly forest. Now to make this look really good, we need to do a lot of work with the texture and the color, making our materials and everything. Don't forget to save it with F3. And again, if you forgot that keyboard shortcut, you can go down to the image menu, find what you're looking for, and see what the keyboard shortcut is for that. All right, so what other low poly scenes can you come up with? Go to electronicarmory.com and post your results on the page for this video. Don't be shy, I really want to see what you guys come up with. That's half the fun for me. And don't worry about it not looking great. I mean, we're just starting here. We just scratched the surface of modeling, let alone other things like texturing, lighting, animation, composition, video editing, motion tracking, and much, much more. But you now have a solid foundation to begin your modeling adventure, whether you want to make models for games, art, 3D printing, architecture, or engineering. Be sure to like this video if you want to see more videos like this. And I hope you enjoyed this tutorial from the Electronic Armory. If you're new here, we have tutorials on all things electronics, from native mobile development, software engineering, electrical engineering, and everything else to arm yourself in the digital world. Be sure to check us out at electronicarmory.com, hit us up on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel for more awesomeness on all things electronic. More info is in the description below. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.